Welcome to Tejal Khandelwal Study Center. Today's topic is power. So let's revise power together. What is the meaning of the term power? Power means the ability to achieve the goals and objectives of your life. It means the ability to get something done by others, which may be against their will or something that they have not consented to do. Power can be understood through its various principal forms, like force, which means control of body, like coercion, which means usage of threats, tacit or overt, persuasion, which means convincing through ideas, manipulation, which means control exercised without threats by usage of ideas, and authority, which means legitimate power. So, power can be understood as a capability, which means as an attribute that actors, individuals, states possess. It can be understood as a relationship, and it can be understood as property of a structure, which means how an agenda is being shaped and controlled. We can also distinguish between the various forms of power that are taking shape. Joseph Nye distinguishes between soft power and hard power. He says, soft power is the power of attraction, which means by the use of culture, by usage of sports, by usage of festivals, by usage of cinema, arts. And hard power, which means usage of military means, sanctions, or punishments. There is also smart power, which he talks about, which is a combination of both soft power and hard power. There is also an important form of power in the present time, which is known as sharp power. We are living in an information age. So, sharp power is the manipulative diplomatic techniques that are used by one country against their adversary. Largely, it can be in the sphere of the cyber domain by usage of information manipulatively. Now, let's see the centrality of power in the discipline of political science. We know that Lasswell says that political science is the study of shaping of power. Yet it remains one of the most contested. Just like money is important in economics, power is important in the realm of political science. If we look at the conventional view of power, it is viewed in the works of thinkers like Machiavelli and Hobbes, who would consider power as domination or usage of force. Hobbes says there is a perpetual desire in mankind to have power until they die. On the other hand, there is also a non-conventional view of power, which looks at power in a positive light or looks at power as a means of empowerment. So Hannah Arendt says, power implies the ability to act in concert in order to take decisions that impact our common life. Example, COVID. COVID was one such situation where people could come together and act collectively to combat that pandemic. Now, we can see various views on power. Stephen Lux gives a radical view. He views power as decision making, like in Weberian terms, as agenda setting, like in the Marxian terms, or as a thought control process, like in the Gramscian terms. Hannah Arendt distinguishes power from force, violence, which are maybe property of individual. But power for her is something when people act collectively. Nietzsche talks about the will to power in man. Initially, Schopenhauer talks about the will to live, which means the way living beings struggle in order to exist, which means the idea of living is very, very important. But Nietzsche says it is not only the will to live, it is the will to power, which means shaping oneself in the best possible way, removing all the barriers internally and externally. That is making an excellent version of oneself, which is inherent quality of individuals, according to Nietzsche. So Nietzsche implies the will to power in man, which means the ability that is being shaped by individuals to achieve their best versions. Now, he says it is not merely a demand to dominate and control. It does not imply will to power over others. Fascism is influenced by Nietzsche, and they used Nietzsche in a very narrow sense by usage of the term will to power. But Nietzsche implied it in a very broad sense in that regard. Now, so it is the essence of willing being's nature, which means overcoming both limitations of oneself and external things. Now, power and hegemony. Marxists talk about that the economic form of power is the base of the society and superstructure is merely a reflection of it. However, Gramsci corrected this, and along with the emphasis on economic power that is situated in the base, he says that superstructures cannot be ignored in the formation of power, which means hegemony. And hegemony is being exercised through legitimate forms or through consent within the sphere of civil society. It is done by intellectuals. So, Gramsci's work emphasizes on cultural hegemony, which means how ideology is being shaped, how culture is being shaped through usage of various ideas. And that also enables to control the masses. It is not only through the domination that is there within the state that masses are being manipulated. So it is, for him, hegemony is manufactured consent. We can look at hegemony even in the international sphere, which can be about how one state exercises control over many others. So we can see that it implies hegemony in the international sphere is the property of a leading state or the attribute of a leading state within a collection of states. Hegemonic status of a particular hegemon or that leading state is based on structural power, which means the economic and military means. They also exercise the political means and the cultural means. They shape the preferences and actions of other states. It is the willing consent rather than use of force that the leading state generates and manufactures, which makes other states to obey and comply and give consent to. So today, if there is any crisis in the world, there is always the importance of the role of USA as a major power that is being visualized. So we see that USA's hegemony has become the root of the international system, even if it faces challenges. Gramsci says that yes, state use even ideological means and not only economic and military means, even in the international sphere. Now let's look at the various theoretical perspectives on the concept of power. The first is the elitist perspective, which means the point that society is divided into two parts. One is the dominant and the other is the dependent groups. However, we can see that even Plato's Republic had spoken of elitism when he organizes society on the basis of dominant traits of the soul and the classes. So, which trait is dominant in whom? And accordingly, they are doing different functions in society and organized in such a way. And Plato believes that all men are not equal. Everybody have different capacities and society needs to be ordered in that regard. So he speaks of functional specialization. When we talk about the elitist theory of power, in the modern times, we can see it in the work of various sociologists like Pareto, Mosca, and Michels, who talk about how power is being only confined to the elite sections because of certain qualities that the elites have, which the masses don't have. Now, let's see that. So, Pareto, in his work, The Mind and Society, points that elites are a superior social group and they are in minority, and the masses lack qualities of leadership and fear responsibility. So, they are, we know, in majority. According to Pareto, there are types of elites. One is the governing elite, which means those who are in power, and the other is the non-governing elite. The non-governing elite is in a perpetual competition in order to replace the governing elite. And this competition eventually leads that power is restricted in a very closed loop and leads to the circulation of elites, which means from the governing to the non-governing, non-governing becoming the governing. And this goes on continuously. However, power never goes to the masses. Now, what are the qualities of elites according to Pareto? According to Pareto, masses are like lions and foxes, and they are very intelligent. Lions because they have to be brave, and fox because they have to be cunning. So the lions are good for the stable time, and the qualities of being cunning and sharp can help in uncertain times. And the qualities of being intelligent and being talented is possessed by elites. Then we have Mosca. Gaetano Mosca, in his work The Ruling Class, also says society is divided into the ruler and the ruled. The quality of elite, unlike Mosca, who talks about being brave or being cunning or being intelligent or talented, Mosca says that the capacity of organization is one of the key qualities of the elites. Just like we see the capacity of organization by the bourgeoisie in the Marxian view, that's making them to dominate the society. Now, so leadership according to Mosca can emerge at any levels, okay? And he is more democratic than Pareto in that sense, which means leadership can even emerge amongst the masses. However, due to the constant competition, it is eventually leading to the circulation of elites. Now, let's see what is Robert Michel saying. He talks about the iron law of oligarchy. He says, irrespective of how much ever democratic aim any organization has, at some point of time, it is that there is always rule of few. And the rule of few, because they have certain qualities of organizing things, decision making, that make them indispensable to the working of that organization. So eventually, it is that iron law, which means it cannot be broken. So Michel says that there is always rule of chosen few, be it the trade unions, the political parties, or the organizations. Even if democratic aims, leaders become indispensable for the organization. All forms of government are reduced to oligarchy. Then we have C. Wright Mills. He has coined the term power elite in the context of USA. He says in USA, the power elite belong to three important realms or spheres, that is industry, military, and politics. The people who rule or dominate in these three spheres are dominating not only by the virtue of their qualities, virtue or their qualities, but they have very closely connected social and cultural origins, which means they might be having family ties, they might be having some kinship ties, and these ties, which are in the social and cultural sphere, enable each other to perpetuate each other's position and strength. So they help each other to rule. So we see that how marriages are known as, contract, which means why? Why marriages are contract? Because we see that there is always the relationship of marriage which can happen amongst two elite groups. For example, a military general's daughter being married to the son of a key politician. So they are very strongly interlinked by family ties. And now, by virtue of these family ties, they will continue to perpetuate each other's military position as well as political position. So the power elite, according to C. Wright Mills, has social and cultural and familial origins, which enables them to rule. So he says not only share cultural and psychological orientations, but also social origins, linked by ties of family and friendship and common social backgrounds, and they strengthen each other's power and position. So he talks of the power elite and how they help each other through a network. So we can see how there is a huge wedding that happened in India. And we saw that people from various spheres and various elites were present in that wedding. Now, against the elitist theory, we have the pluralist theory of power, which is the view of Robert Dahl, which we saw even in Democracy. So, Robert Dahl talks about polyarchy and deformed polyarchy and how power is not only with the elites, but it is dispersed amongst various interest groups within a society. Now, let's move towards Foucault's view on power. Chronologically, I should have analyzed after the pluralist and the elitist and the pluralist perspective, the Weberian perspective. But since it is taking a very different dimension of authority, I have discussed authority and legitimacy in a different sphere. So now we will move towards Foucault's view, which is a postmodernist perspective. Michel Foucault was a French historian, philosopher, and an activist. He was brilliant but psychologically tormented. In 1960s, he held various positions at French universities. In 1969, he became the professor of history of systems of thought and died in 1984 in Paris. He was associated with structuralist and post-structuralist movements. He is also a postmodernist thinker, as he is a great critique of modernity and enlightenment. He is highly influenced by existentialism of Sartre and by Nietzsche, who is a critique of enlightenment and talks about the will to power in man. He is also influenced by Marxism. He is also influenced by the French tradition on the history and philosophy of science. Now let's analyze the works of Foucault, and then we will move on to a deeper analysis of his view on power. In Madness and Civilization, he talks about the evolution of the concept of madness from the Middle Ages until the modern and the impact of this concept on culture, law, politics, and medicine. In the Middle Ages, the lepers were considered as madness and lived on the edge of the city. In the age of Renaissance, madness was being associated with those who were insane and socially undesirable. In the classical age, the one who renounced reason was considered as mad. And in the modern times, madness refers to a mental condition. And in this context, psychologists, doctors, and psychiatrists cure this illness within certain asylums and hospitals. Now, this concept of madness, as it has evolved, has pointed to how certain people had to be kept excluded from the society in order to protect the larger society, and what was not considered as normal behavior. He is a great critique of the historical method. He also, in Madness and Civilization, talks about the reason that has emerged in enlightenment and how this reason has come to be defined, has led to discrimination and mistreatment of many sections of society. Now, so the reason in Western philosophy being associated with science, he is a great critique of that. Because earlier man was controlled by religion and later man was controlled by science. In his other work, Order of Things, Archaeology of the Human Sciences, he points to how in every historical period there is a particular way of thinking. There is some epistemic assumptions that we make and discourses about various subjects. A discourse is not telling the reality, it is the way of telling reality. A discourse is how usage of language shapes construction of truth and how this truth is being confirmed later. In this work, he says that this thinking always changes with time and it leads, he says, to paradigms of intellectualism. He points towards the archaeological method in this work, which we will discuss now. And he speaks about the notion of representation, how things are being represented. So what is being represented is not what reality is. And in this work, he has brought in a painting and how the painting appears to the observer may not be what actually may be the truth. So the depiction of the truth may not be what is the truth in that way. In his work, Discipline and Punish, he uses the genealogical method. In this work, he makes a key connection between two elements, that is knowledge and power, and how knowledge, which could have been not being biased in that sense, is also being used as a technique to perpetuate power. In this, he points also towards modern way of the imprisoning of the criminals rather than torturing or killing them that was done in the earlier times. So torturing for regicide, which means killing a monarch, and how it was also publicly done in punishments. Then comes the prison and how things change. So the new mode of punishment that is happening within the prison is not in order to humanize the idea of punishment or for reform of criminals. It is also a way of the control of society. So through this work, he says how in society control is being maintained. He talks about it as a modern disciplinary society where three ways are done. That is hierarchical observation, normalizing judgment, and examination. We will evaluate each of these terms. I wanted to introduce you to his various works and how in different works he is talking of different concepts. So here in Madness and Civilization, he explains how things have evolved across history and how they are being controlling things. In the order of things, he is talking about discourses, and here he is talking about how governmentality is being and how a modern disciplinary society comes into existence. So different works talk toward different things. Now, let's move towards methodology of Foucault. What is the archaeological method? So archaeology is like a metaphor. A metaphor for what? Which means the archaeological method or the word archaeology is a metaphor for how we have to analyze a system of thought in a particular time. So when we say the archaeological method, he talks how in a given historical movement things are being analyzed. He points knowledge as something that lies beneath a surface and needs to be uncovered before it can be understood. So we do not only understand knowledge, but what is it that is not being shown to us. So when we look at knowledge as a very important component, we know in philosophy, knowledge was very important component that was highlighted by Socrates. Later thinkers made critique of knowledge like Kant and Locke. And Foucault reverses Kant's position also. And he says and questions the very basis of how knowledges are being delivered. So he reverses even the concept or the critique of knowledge that was being made by Kant. So he questions how this modern human sciences like biology, discipline of psychology, and how they are being constructed with a specific purpose in mind. So an archaeological method is a way of looking at how knowledge is being constructed and at a historical moment. Okay, fine. So knowledge is something that lies beneath a surface and needs to be uncovered before it can be understood. To read vast amounts of writing that is being produced about a certain domain at a certain time. So he looks at it at that particular time, what could have been the larger picture within the society or the larger thought process that has shaped a particular way of looking at things. So why reason came to be dominated in Renaissance and Enlightenment and why it was not so? Because maybe religion was dominating earlier and later reason and sciences became very important for establishing and giving effect to capitalism. Okay, obviously capitalism was a result though. So in this way, he says that within the larger context that we have to understand why something is being said. Okay, so archaeology is like a metaphor that is being used by Foucault. What is archaeology? How we learn things, how we uncover things from the past. So he is talking of that way of how we have to uncover things from the past, from the broader prevalent thing that was happening at that time. Okay. So he says to read vast amounts of writing produced about a certain domain at a certain time, to determine the fundamental rules that governing use of language in that written corpus. So he uses this archaeological method in Madness and Civilization and Order of Things. Okay, so knowledge is not something which is, unbiased in that way. In the genealogy of power, he is making a connection between power and knowledge. Here he is talking about how in a historical context why something evolves, right? So in this he is talking of that particular time, which means, for example, when he was talking of the concept of madness and how madness evolves differently in different eras, okay? Because madness is just a part of the broader theme that is happening within that particular time. And here he makes a connection between knowledge and power. So he locates what is the basis of power. And this genealogy is not in the context of locating genes of family like it is in biology and natural sciences. Okay, so he is locating the very basis of knowledge and power connection that he makes. Okay, so he challenges the traditional practices of history, philosophical assumptions, and established conceptions of knowledge, truth, and power. He reverses all the positions that has been there. And he deconstructs truth, how there is influence of power even on truth. He establishes the knowledge-power connection. And then he brings in various other aspects also as we move forth. So archaeological method is something at a given historical moment, and genealogy is how as a historical process things have happened. Okay, now what is a discourse? Okay, it is a system of thought, knowledge, or communication that constructs world experience. So in simple terms, discourse is the way of telling something, how something is being communicated to you. So the way becomes more important than actually how that thing is, right? So discourse implies how through communication, how through expression, something is being conveyed. So it may not necessarily be the truth. It is like a narrative. It is like a story which is being formed to convince you about something. Okay, that is a discourse. So he points that various ideas, various attitudes, various beliefs, various practices, and various courses of action construct subjects and the world. So there are lot of processes that are going on in telling what that world was, how people lived in that era, or how we want to explain the present circumstances also. So it is not something that we are only explaining a particular event. It is what ideas are shaping how that event is being communicated about. So it is like a storytelling, okay? So he says various ideas, attitudes, and beliefs, practices, and course of action go in how we construct worlds and subjects. He says, what is the role of discourse? Why is discourse being created? For legitimation of power. For example, always Indian nationalist historians, they write about the British in a very different light. Why so? Because they want to convince to all the upcoming generations that how there has been an exploitation, which was also true by the British that was done, but we cannot look at history only from that one narrative or one discourse. because that narrative is in order to evoke that patriotism in all the upcoming future generations. So discourses are being created to legitimize power. So for example of any historical event, we say the US narrative is different than maybe the Chinese or maybe the Indian. Why? Because we look at one event from our perspective. Why from our perspective? Because we want to benefit from that particular storytelling. So discourses are created for legitimation of power. Okay? According to whom? Foucault. So he says to construct, it concerns, the discourse is about to construct contemporary truths, to maintain these. So how first it is constructed, how these are maintained, and how to determine relations of power among the constructed truths. So it will always be with a motive. He says that truths are created through discourse, and he says there is no universal truth and no ultimate truth. We have to look at truth from multiple perspectives. That's why we also say he is a postmodernist thinker. He don't like universalization and homogenization of anything. Okay? There is nothing which is certain in this world. It is how it is being conveyed. Okay? So he says truths are created through discourse. But these truths, there is nothing universal about it and there is nothing ultimate about these truths. He says the Foucaultian discourse analysis is what? So FDA we call it, Foucaultian discourse analysis. Here the importance is given to how language is used in philosophy. So the importance of language, is very, how you articulate something, how terms are being associated, right? That shapes a very important part in how discourse. So in his entire analysis, the importance of linguistics has been emphasized. Okay? So he says, so if we look at the FDA, Foucaultian discourse analysis, what is the key aspect of it? Okay? Language can construct the societal knowledge and how it upholds existing power structures. So language is a very important component in Foucault. I'm going a little bit detail here because I know students find it little difficult to understand Foucault. Okay, so I have taken a more deeper understanding for all of you. Now, let's move towards thoughts of Foucault. So why we say he is a structuralist? Because he examined structures. Structures of what? He examined the structures of knowledge. What is it that is shaping this knowledge? And he points that knowledge is also the object of the discourse. Now, post-structuralist shift has happened from this perspective. He analyzed the subjects of the discourse. And who are the subjects? People. So how that discourse is trying to shape a particular individual's mentality and make him or her conform. That's when you make him a subject, right? So in the post, we say he's a post-structuralist because now he makes it subject of discourse, and earlier he has made it as an object of the discourse. Knowledge as the object of discourse. Why he is a postmodernist? Because he criticizes enlightenment. He rejected the Enlightenment project. What did Enlightenment bring? It emphasized on universal reason, it emphasized on universal science, and that is what he is critical of. So the sciences are not, impartial. They are also having biasness, according to him. Reason that has been shaped in this era also has biasness. So he says human beings are considered as an independent entity, right? Individualism is too much emphasized in this time. So he says he rejects this liberal humanism, which forms the basis, obviously Enlightenment forms the basis of all philosophies that will emerge. Now, modernity as an objective knowledge. Foucault says there is no objective knowledge. everything is subjective understanding. So he is a postmodernist in that sense. And he is also a critical theorist because he rejects both liberal as well as the Marxist view of power. Why the liberal? Because in liberal philosophy, individual becomes the core of power. And in the Marxist view, class is becoming the core of power. So he rejects both these notions. He says power is neither through one structure or one agency that is individual. No, it is not an element or quality of an agency or a structure. He says we can't look at it so macro. We have to look at it at micro sites, which means power is there across society in various networks of relations that operate in society. Okay, so he says power is diffused throughout the social structure, just like blood in capillary. So in this way, Foucault can be a structuralist, he can be a post-structuralist, though he doesn't admit, postmodernist and a critical theorist. Now, in Discipline and Punish, he is talking about the history of how prisons have evolved. And we understand this whole concept of prison that he is talking about is the modern form of prison, is like a modern society which is disciplining things and creating, confirmation in many ways. So when we talk about the history of prison, he looks at 4 phases. First, it was a torture. Now, why he calls it a torture? Because any regicide or any activity that has been done, okay, by a criminal in that way, by an individual, that person will be really killed very badly. So there was something known as dismemberment that used to happen, completely cutting off the limbs of the individual. So this kind of torture that a human being is pushed through. Then it became punishment, which means, you were either forming human gangs and you were serving the punishment. Fine. And there were various other punishments that were given. Then there is disciplinary form, which means what has to be done in order to ensure that criminals do not behave in that way. And then finally the prison came. Now this entire evolution that he is talking in terms of the evolution of the history of prison, it is not humanity or human basis or reformation of the criminals. That is the thought process. No. It is about how state wanted to appear as more legitimate and less cruel. Okay. So initially the sovereign being killed, which means a monarch being killed, and you are convicted of regicide, then you are gone. You will be tortured. But now it has changed. Okay, so you will not be tortured like dismembered that way. Fine. So how this evolves? So these 4 things he talks about in Discipline and Punishment. What is of more importance that we need to understand is that this modern prison is like a development of a gentler modern way of imprisoning criminals. Okay. And rather than to torturing or killing them. So why we do prison? In order to have a more effective control. How in prison? How there is more effective control? Which means he uses the concept of panopticon. What is a panopticon? Panopticon is like a centralized structure. Okay, it is like the vision that we get of every prison. I mean, every prisoner in a prison. Okay, so in this panopticon, which is a concept of Bentham, he says this centralized structure enables the state to see what is the activity of the prison. Similarly, this prison can be compared to society. Even society today, we are creating a modern society which is in order to ensure better effective control, like a panopticon in the prison only. So society may be disciplinary ways of things are being done. So he talks of which power? Disciplinary form. disciplinary power here. And the earlier aspect he was talking of in the Madness and Civilization, he talks of the sovereign power. Okay. Now, so the new mode of punishment is becoming a model for control of an entire society. It is a modern system of disciplinary power. And how this is being exercised. So he says, the first is hierarchical observation. What is observation? See, if we want to understand something, the best way is to observe. So the state is observing you, right? That's what he says. Society is observing you all the time. Why it is observing you? So he says there is also hierarchical observation, which means there is some flow of data that happens in a hierarchy, which means some data cannot flow directly. For example, the one who is dominating and one who is being dominated, they might not communicate directly. So there will be some, middle instruments that will be designed, mediators that will be designed to allow this information flow. All right. That's why hierarchical observation. So he says control over people by observing them, relays of observers, data passes from lower to higher levels, hierarchical observation. What is normalization? Normalization, which means we say what is normal and what is abnormal in society. And that happens according to a society's norm. So what may be normal in America may be abnormal in India. So our society's cultural norms and other things are different. Now, by defining this normalization is why? Because we want to control deviant behavior. We want everyone to adhere to this society's norms. So we want a typical way of life as an Indian, right? We want that, how things have to be happening in India, which may be not how it is happening in the US. So he says to correct deviant behavior, normalization is being done. Discipline through imposing society's norms and standards. So disciplinary power is something he speaks about in this evolution of the modern prison that he's taking. Then he says examination happened. Why examination? So we have the NEET examination, right? In order to, if you want to become a doctor. And we do it at a national level. Why? Because everyone who wants to practice medicine in the country needs to have certain standards. They need to have a good understanding of something. That is what is expected. Or if you want to become a civil servant, you have to go through this process of examination. Means you need to have certain set of attitude. The interview process is there. No, why? Why interview? So that you will be able to know what is the requirement of this exam. If you act like a radicalist, do you think they will ever select you? They will not. So examination is that check. Firstly, examination is a collection of an individual's entire history. क्या किया है, क्या नहीं किया है. So school we are being, when you see your school report card, you see, who is your parent, who is your mother, who is not. And that identity that even today to do so many documents, your 10th and 12th standard examination certificate is required. Why? Because it shows your entire history, and there should not be, like if you have to make a passport, any name change will be problematic. Why? So you are controlling an individual's entire life process through this examination. And you are creating certain standards in the society which everybody should be checked upon. That's why the system of examination. Okay. So it is a method of control, according to Foucault, by creation of records, which is detailed information about individuals. So it categorizes also who is excellent, who is average, who is below average, hai na? Percentages वगैरह है ना, to know what is your talent, skill, everything about you. So in this, through the medium of prison, he is explaining how society also works like that, like the prison. How it is centralized, surveillance system operates in a prison to overlook everybody. Society is also having this centralized structure, right? And it is overviewing you all the time. But he says, that wherever there is power, there will also be resistance to power. तो ऐसा नहीं है कि सिर्फ हम पावर एक्सरसाइज करते, पावर को चैलेंज भी किया जाता है in many ways. Okay, now let's see his views on power that he makes even later in the history of sexuality. History of modern sexuality we'll also analyze, but now let's see which is most important from the exam point of view for us. So first is micro analysis of power, which means liberals associated with individual who is the agency of power, and Marxists associated with the structure, that is class, okay, and how through this structure of society the classes are dominating in this structure. But he says no, you can't look at power as being of any authority like the state or the agency like the individual or structure like the Marxist point. You have to look at power in a micro sense. Power is there across society. Everybody is exercising it. And it is like how blood is flowing in capillaries. You can't, separate, the blood and capillary very easily. So just like that in society, it is pervading every sphere. So first he gives a micro analysis of power. So he says rather than top down, you look at power is bottom up, okay? Microsites where he says power is everywhere, just like blood in capillaries throughout the society. Second dimension is knowledge power connection. So, if we look at Socratic understanding of knowledge, knowledge is the basis of all philosophy for him. Virtue is knowledge, he says. I'm sorry. So Plato and Socrates talk about how the most important quality is knowledge. Later scholar says no, not only knowledge, we have to look at different aspects also. So Locke and others will say empirical basis of knowledge, not any universal. ठीक है. Now, Foucault says that we understood knowledge as very pristine, and we understood that this was given and understood without any motive. But knowledge, which means, for example, as a doctor, what is the basis of your knowledge? Medicine, right? Or as a political theorist, how you analyze various texts. So he says that knowledge also is not, unbiased, which means it is neutral, or the understanding that is there in natural sciences is neutral. No, he says how knowledge is being conveyed. In biology, for example, it is said that, the male is stronger than female, but in true we see women are giving birth. So knowledge has become biased, no? It is asserting, biology is asserting male. Now we see, later studies, as feminism has grown, now we are seeing how biology's earlier fact finding is false. It is showing, recent studies show that no, women are also strong in many terms. And they can do leap of faith things, So why this has changed? Because today it is feminist perspective that is dominating. But earlier it was the patriarchal. So biology bhi kya thi? Knowledge hai, science hai. It is not impartial. So who dominates in society? Who holds power in society? They shape knowledge also. How history is written, told to you at a particular time or today. So knowledge, which should have not been utilized as a technique for power, is also being utilized according to whom? So knowledge is falling at the feet of power. But knowledge should have been the greatest thing in the world. Na? When somebody gives knowledge to you, you consider them beyond everything. Like Dronacharya. Na? So, but it was not the case. He was also at the feet of power, So, power is exercised as a technique. Power permeates even the knowledge. I'm sorry, here it is. Knowledge is exercised as a technique for power. And power permeates knowledge. Discourses, even theories are discourses. Theory is relative and serves the purpose of power. So, second dimension is knowledge-power connection. First is the micro-analysis. Then he talks about nature of power. So in all this view, do you think he looks at power as very negative? No. In fact, he is looking at power as a more constructive idea. So he says power is positive, how it constitutes things and how power is productive in that sense. It shapes everything in society. It is not negative, prohibitive or repressive. Okay? It may take the form of domination occasionally. Now, power and resistance is a very important link followed from here. How? So for him, wherever there is power, the inherent quality of power is कि resistance होगा. You cannot separate. So he says, despite the centrality, like the panopticon centrality, he says there is always resistance. So three types of resistance are there against power. One is against exploitation, there will be resistance. Against ethnic domination, there will be resistance, for example, minority, majority. Any form of subjection that we do to control someone, that will also lead to resistance. Then he says the types of power. So first he talks of sovereign power, which means how state became too controlling, monarchy became too controlling, or church becomes too controlling. But then, so yeah, here the idea is more in context of state, obviously. Then he talks of disciplinary power, which means how legitimate way of doing things happen, how society takes control in a more legitimate and effective manner. And then he talks of biopower. So sovereign power was something like, killing somebody, right? It could have been that, or taking some tax. So it was more like, more about death. If you're killing somebody, if you're doing wrong, which means your power is being exercised through the medium of death. But biopower means controlling whole of life. So this has also changed according to Foucault. Let's see how. So he says in the history of modern sexuality that the modern control of sexuality and the modern control of criminality are parallel. So just like crime was punished, similarly, sex is also being, how sex has to be understood will also be different. So he equates or makes a parallel between criminality and sexuality, which means the component of it being sex and crime is being equated. Just like how crime had to be controlled, how we understand sexuality and sex has to be controlled. Because he is a homosexual. Now, so he says sexuality is essential constructs is associated with what? Moral worth, health, there has to be some repression of desires, and how it creates identity. So imagine if you don't recognize LGBT, we say it is complete, your sexual identity is so important in your formation, and you can't separate that. So similarly, he says it is a part of identity. These are essential constructs. So he says panopticon, it might appear as centrality, yet there is resistance which is inherent in power. So we will question this. Then he says sex is assumed as natural, which means what is, male and female, that is natural, and this is natural sex. Any other form is unnatural sex. So he says maleness and femaleness, if they are natural, they are not so natural. How natural sciences are making them. They are creations. They are invented. मतलब natural science में क्या है? Power connection to control behaviors of sex. What is natural? What is unnatural? As per the Christian religion. Okay? Now, so he says in discourse, they are also discourses claiming status to be scientific truth, but they are invented. Okay? So he talks of biopower. What is biopower? Biopower means controlling your life, your birth, your health, your death, your childbirth, everything. So you are not controlling people by killing them. You are controlling their whole of life processes like a panopticon. So biopower, he says, administration of bodies, management of life through scientific and continuous means, not death. It is why we are controlling all this life, because we can make a better impact on your life. That's why state is controlling. Biopower, control over your life processes. So what are the techniques of this biopower? He points controlling populations, medical care, normalize the behavior, rationalize mechanisms of insurance, and even urban planning. Why urban planning? Because environmental pollution, other things impact your health. So what has to be done, which part of cities, where livable, where not livable, everything. Okay. So in this he talks, so we are associating sex and biopower together in this way. Okay. Now let's analyze the concept of authority. Power means the ability to do something. On the other hand, authority implies the right to do so. It has legal and constitutional connotations. Authority is the means of gaining compliance. And Weber says it is legitimate power. So there is always weight that will be attached to the concept of authority. Why? Because it is only by gaining rightful authority that your rule will enjoy obedience and compliance on the part of others, which means the citizens will obey a person or an individual in authority because of the legal and constitutional basis on which that person is holding that position. However, even if they might be viewed as separate concepts, we can say that they are intrinsically very much linked. For example, during the time of the protest, Sheikh Hasina had the authority to be the Prime Minister of Bangladesh. But as soon as she lost the control over her power, which means when the student protest as well as the military turned against her, she lost the power. And because of the loss of power, she also lost her authority. On the other hand, legally and constitutionally, she could have been holding that position rightfully. It is in this context that we analyze power and authority. Now, let's look at Max Weber's concept, how he analyzes authority. First, before analyzing his concept of authority, let's look at the framework in which he looks at things. So he makes an ideal type. Now, what is an ideal type? An ideal means something that is perfect, something that is ideal, or the best form of something. And type, which means a classification of something. So by its term, it might appear to you that an ideal type is a perfect example of something. On the other hand, Weber uses the term ideal type in a very specific connotation. He says that there are certain essential attributes that are associated with any concept's classification. So he makes ideal type as a mental construct, as a theoretical construct, against or through which we can check the reality and point that to what extent reality is in consonance with those specific or basic attributes or against it. So ideal type does not mean the perfect example of something as it might sound in the general parlance. But in fact, it is a tool, it is a methodological tool that Weber has devised in order to explain certain virtues of something. So if we say, is liberal democracy an ideal type? or the consultative democracy or socialist democracy an ideal type? How do we check? So we say that democracy may have certain attributes. If they are present in the liberal democracy, then we can say it is a better democracy. But if these certain attributes are not present in the consultative socialist democracy, then it is going against the very basic nature that is of democracy. Those basic attributes like rights, liberty, justice, equality. So ideal type is a theoretical device, a mental construct, and a methodological tool. It is not a perfect classification, group, or type of something. Okay? Now we'll associate this. So it is not a description of the empirical reality. He uses it as a framework to analyze reality vis-a-vis what? Vis-a-vis certain attributes. Now, so Weber talks about power not only in terms like the Marxists say, property of an economic structure or a thought control process in the Gramscian. In fact, he says that power and its attributes are in all aspects of social relations. So, in terms of status, in terms of authority, that power has to be viewed. So, he says it is not only economic power or political power which are the key aspects, even social aspects become key. So, it is aspect of social relations and present in all aspects of our life. So, even Foucault talks of power like this, present in all aspects of life. Authority is a form of power, and he says authority is legitimate power, which means people will obey authority because there is an element of consent, willing compliance and obedience that authority enjoys. And reciprocal relationship between the ruler and the ruled. And how do we come to know this? When people will pay taxes, whether legitimacy is being there. When people pay taxes, when they follow the laws, when they don't do deviant things that way. Okay? Now, so he talks about 3 types of authorities. First is the traditional authority. And this is based on customs and traditions. And it is hereditary system of power and privileges that any leader enjoys. Historic and cultural reasons. For example, dynastic rule, religious leader, tribal chief. So as a process across history, when there is leadership that is being exercised, that is traditional authority. Charismatic authority, on the other hand, is not because of history or privileges. It is because of personal characteristics, something which is very typically unique about a person, which can please everybody. So, charismatic authority, according to Weber, is based on personal quality. It is exceptional personal characteristics of a leader, like Hitler could appease masses. Then there is a rational legal authority which has emerged in the modern bureaucratic system, which means authority is how it is based on certain laws and rules that the person in that office adheres to, and it is based on some rational procedures of coming to that position, for example through an examination or a recruitment process. So he says in the modern industrial bureaucratic state there is a body of rules that govern, exercise power on rational grounds, and there are impersonal rules, which means whether it is me, my father cannot favor me in that rule. Okay, so there will not be nepotism in that sense. Fine. That rule will apply to everybody, irrespective of who the person is. So it is impersonal. Emanates from political offices, appointed through prescribed procedures and most efficiently form of authority. Now he says that when we talk about authority, there can be an authority where this person is rational, legal, but that person might have charisma also, right? So we cannot say that all these 3 operate in silos. Weber says maybe 2 things coexist. However, the most efficient form in modern times, most rational way of who should be in authority, the legal constitutional basis that are derived is in the form of bureaucracy, and that is rational legal authority. Okay. So he is talking of things in this sense. Now, legitimacy. What is legitimacy? Consent of people for the state is legitimacy. So, for example, when we feel that, the Modi wave, they say, or Modi ki guarantee, and people believe in this idea and vote, which means there is legitimacy for his power, for the idea that he is portraying to us. For example, if we look at elections after 370 in Jammu and Kashmir, and if people are coming to vote even at the local body levels, which means we are showing that this decision of repealing of 370, still the state enjoys legitimacy, which means people still believe in the state should be the rightful way of ruling, and people pay taxes there. There is less and less violence that is happening, which means the state enjoys legitimacy, and people will obey and do willing compliance in this sense. And this willing compliance is not because there is authority, it is because people feel that yes, this state, this government, in this sense, this government is the good government, it is doing good work for us. Okay. So legitimacy implies this. It is power exercised in a manner which is considered as rightful, justified, and acceptable. It is based on respect and willing compliance. That is the concept of legitimacy. And how we see legitimacy: when people pay taxes, when they follow rules, and how legitimacy is being created when we have opposition, independent judiciary, freedom of people to speak, right? So, ideal speech situation, Habermas says, where people have the freedom to speak whatever they want. Right? That is how legitimacy is created. Now, Habermas talks about legitimation crisis. What is legitimation crisis? Which means, when will a government not enjoy legitimacy? What will happen? There will be crisis of governability, which means now the people will not believe in the power of the government to give them justice or good governance. That is legitimation crisis, which means we no more have faith that you are the rightful ruler for us, or the rightful government who will give us what we need. Right? So legitimation crisis means it is difficult for the government to rule, and it is not able to manage the situation. For example, too much protest. So if we look at, the emergency years prior to that, there was a lot of crisis of governability. There was a more difficult challenge for India's democracy, right? So that is legitimation crisis. Now, what is Habermas saying? He's saying it is inevitable in a welfare state. Welfare state, with whatever design you have come in order to overcome the problems that were there in the liberal, individualist, capitalist state, still there are certain contradictions. Why? Because you changed certain things, however, the core remains the same. So he says the welfare state principles are in contradiction. Now, what are the principles that are in contradiction? So he says that there is capitalism in economics and there is socialism in politics. And this is problematic. Why? Because then you will use the taxation, the higher taxation that you will do, and you will divert these taxations towards redistribution to benefits for the poor, which will be very difficult to sustain over a period of time, which means the productive resource that is generated from the capitalist system is being diverted towards the unproductive resource. And then slowly, it will be difficult to maintain this. Then there will be, competitive politics also that will happen. One country, the left party is the liberal parties, they will continuously be in, certain kind of opposition and saying these policies are not good, these policies. So this competitive party politics will also happen, and people will have alternatives in that sense. So in garb of competitive, the governments will also give, lot of benefits to the voters, but these will be difficult to sustain. So giving too much of freebies, reveries we say, is problematic, because then you are not able to sustain it for a very long time. So that's why it will not be able to sustain welfare policies, the welfare state. And what is naturally going to happen? Legitimation crisis. So protest will happen and crisis of governability will come because of competitive. All parties will say, we will give you this, we will give you this. And to give that becomes very difficult. Okay, so that is saying, so legitimation crisis is decreasing capacity of the state to govern. It is crisis tendencies within capitalist societies. Okay, and what he says, what are the machinery for legitimacy is the democratic system, party system, social and welfare reforms. Okay, so how legitimation crisis is bound to occur within capitalist society who adopt welfare state policies. That's why higher fiscal deficits, budgetary deficits and other problem also arise. Okay, competitive populism will also arise. Fine. So this is about power and various perspectives. So we started with the elitist perspective, the pluralist perspective, then the Foucault's postmodernist perspective, the Weberian perspective. Okay, we know the Marxist perspective already, the economic basis of power and how it is a structure. All right, so I hope all the concepts of power are clear. Thank you so much. All the best.